Survivor Man is the 7th episode of the 4th season of The Office. This is directed by the wonderful Paul Feig, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And I didn't really enjoy this one, to be honest. I didn't dislike it. There's nothing about it that didn't work. I didn't think anything was badly done. I just didn't think it was very funny. We have a couple of okay moments, but in general, I didn't get much out of it. There are two parts to the narrative. I'll talk about them in turn. Sometimes I'll go through The Office chronologically, but with this one, I'll talk about the main narrative, and then I'll talk about the subplot with the birthdays. And the main narrative focuses on the fact that Rainn had invited the branch managers and Toby to this wilderness retreat. But Michael didn't get to go. So Michael's deciding that he's going to go out and make it on his own anyway. So he makes Dwight drive him out to the middle of wherever. And there was a funny moment where, kind of dangerous, but Dwight's driving and he's hitting Michael on the head saying, "It'll be better if you're unconscious," which is just kind of bizarre, but very funny. I did enjoy that moment. And Michael then is out in the wilderness. And we don't actually get to see that much of it, but I guess what we got was okay. Some of the camera work is from the perspective of the mockumentary, and some of it is from Michael's own camera as he's taking a camcorder with him, and we get to see a bit of that footage. So I like that. I thought that gave it a nice mix that worked quite well while still allowing it to keep the documentary feel. And Michael starts ripping his clothing up at one moment. He's been there for not a long time, and then he starts to chillingly sing "Happy Birthday" to Creed because it's Creed's birthday. Creed's not there, of course, but he's singing this, and it was a very bizarre moment. And this part of the narrative ends. As I said, I don't have a tremendous amount to say. This part ends as he's about to eat some mushrooms, and Dwight, who didn't drive home or back to the office, but actually just stayed just out of sight to keep an eye on Michael. This is Dwight who was beating him over the head a few scenes before, but he was observing Michael. Maybe because he cared about Michael, but probably largely because he thought Michael wouldn't be able to make it on his own, even for these couple of hours. And of course, when Michael goes to eat these mushrooms, he runs towards him, and that's the end of Michael's adventure. The birthday story, I think, was quite interesting with regards to the character of Jim, but it wasn't necessarily interesting in itself. It is the birthday month, the month when multiple people in the office have birthdays, and Angela tells Jim they need to get another cake, and Jim's just a little bit fed up of this, so he suggests just having one big birthday month party instead, which feels like a little bit of a cheat because everybody else is getting individual celebrations, but at the same time, does anybody really care if your office celebrates your birthday if you're working in an office? Personally, I always found it really awkward, and maybe the other people think that, but it's Creed's birthday, it's Creed's day, he should get his own cake. But Jim is adamant that they're going to have this one big party. And we do get a fun montage, I did like this, of Michael celebrating everybody's birthdays in ways that only Michael would do. That was quite fun. Nobody else is very happy about this giant big birthday party, and at one point, Phyllis tries to get Jim's attention and accidentally calls him Michael. The look on Jim's face, absolutely fantastic. I did enjoy that a lot. And before we have too much time to think about this, Michael comes in singing "Happy Birthday" to Creed. He's come back in from his... Would Michael say it was a failed adventure? Well, he certainly realises that he doesn't need to be out in the wild because he has everything he needs around him, which is quite sweet. It's quite nice. I quite like that sentiment. And we have a nice little discussion between Michael and Jim. And Michael told Jim that things would start to make sense to him in 10 years' time, because Michael had once upon a time tried the big party thing and it didn't work. And one day Jim will be where Michael is and he'll have learned all of these lessons that Michael has learned. And Jim comments that he doesn't think he'll be there in 10 years. To which Michael replied, "That's what I said." And we get a close-up of Jim, and it's very clear that Jim is, well, thinking that he might need to do something unless he wants to still be there in 10 years' time. And I think that that's a great takeaway from the episode. I also don't like it in one sense, and I'll discuss that in a second, but I think the great takeaway there is that anybody watching it could in that moment assess whether they want to be in their current job within 10 years, within the next 10 years, or do they want to leave? And I feel like it's so easy when you're in a job that is decent, as long as it's not a bad job, it's not a bad working environment, you don't mind working there. But at the same time, do you really see yourself being there in 10 years? And if not, what are you doing about it? Because I think with Jim, he doesn't see himself being there in 10 years, but he's also not doing anything about it. And I think that could be a really good takeaway for anybody watching that episode who might be in the same position as Jim, as I imagine a lot of people are. Leaving a comfortable job is very scary. It's very risky as well. But at the same time, looking into the future, it's a balance of what do I do for me that's good for me now versus paving the way for me in the future. And I think that Jim's definitely in that headspace right now. But I also don't like it because does that mean Jim is now going to start thinking of leaving Dunder Mifflin permanently? And I haven't looked ahead. I haven't seen any spoilers. Well, I've seen a few spoilers for The Office, but not about this. It's very difficult. The algorithm loves and hates me because I Google one thing about The Office and suddenly my timeline is flooded with things about The Office. It's very difficult to resist the temptation to look away when something pops up on Instagram. And occasionally I'll get things spoiled, but that's more so my fault for not being able to resist the temptation. But as I was trying to say, I'm 100% confident, I guess 99.999% confident that Jim will never leave the show because I don't think it would work without him. I could be wrong. Please don't tell me though, I don't want to know. But at the same time, they could make it work if he left. They've made it work with Rainn moving Branch. They made it work when Jim moved Branch. So if he were to leave Dunder Mifflin, I think they'd still make it work. But I don't want that to happen. Maybe one day, but it's too soon. We've had too much upheaval, too much chaos in a short space of time. I want a couple of seasons, at least, to just enjoy Jim being in the office, Jim working alongside Pam, Jim taking the time he needs to figure out what he wants to do next. Because, of course, the flip side is that, yes, it is important to think about the future and what you want within the next 10 years, but also to not jump into it and just panic and think, oh my goodness, I don't want to be here in 10 years' time, so I'm going to quit. Because that's kind of the flip side of the situation where, yes, for some people, that might work out well. Sometimes a person needs that fear, and without having a job, it will drive them to get the job they want. But let's face it, in today's climate, even if you have that drive, you might not have that job. It's not necessarily available. So I don't think Jim's going to do that. I think he will take time to think about it. And my prediction with The Office is usually always incorrect. I don't think I've been correct about anything at this stage, which is good fun. It keeps me on my toes. But my prediction is that eventually he will at least start looking into other things. We don't know a lot about Jim personally, about his likes, his interests, his hobbies. And I feel like if we begin to tap into that, we'll find out more about what he wants from life and what he ultimately would like to achieve. I think we've learned a little bit about him, but I think there's a lot more beneath the surface. And I think the main reason we haven't learned that much about Jim is that whenever he's in focus, usually it's because he's pulling a prank on somebody, Dwight, or he's helping somebody out, or it's in relation to Pam and Karen. It's very rare that yes, Medora, it's very rare that we have focus on just Jim and who Jim is and who he is outside of work. And I'd quite like to tap into that. But as long as it doesn't mean he's immediately, if ever, leaving Dunder Mifflin. I think I've talked about this too much. Long story short, I don't want anything to change immediately because we've already had a lot of upheaval. For an episode where I said I didn't particularly enjoy it and I didn't have a lot to say, I've managed to talk quite a lot. Survivor Man in itself is not my favourite, but it's fine. Not many funny moments, but some interesting moments. Certainly with Jim and Michael there. So ultimately, it's not a bad episode. I think it's also one of the first episodes in a good few episodes where there's that office relatability. One of the great things about The Office that I've come to realise, and it might sound ridiculous to say because it's pretty obvious, but if you work in an office, there is a strong element of relatability. But with a lot of the episodes recently, because they've been focused on not necessarily office life, but things happening surrounding it, it's not been as relatable. But with this one and the whole birthday thing, yeah, definitely relatable. And I'm kind of in the middle. I don't think one giant birthday month celebration is acceptable if everybody else in other months gets their own celebration. But I also just think, just sign a card. You don't need to do a cake. You don't need to do anything that Michael was doing. I just think it's really awkward when offices go a little bit all out for birthdays. I just find it a bit bizarre and uncomfortable, but maybe that's just me. Either way, Survivor Man had its good moments. It's not a great episode, but there were definitely some aspects that I enjoyed.